Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Poltergeist cases have always fascinated me. They straddle that line between unexplainable mystery and obvious hoax in a way that makes them extremely compelling to unpack. One of the strangest cases I've heard of bears all the hallmarks of a classic poltergeist haunting, but with one additional feature. The entity appeared in the form of a talking mongoose. The tale of the talking mongoose began in 1930. The Irving family, consisting of husband and wife James and Margaret, and a 13-year-old daughter Voirrey. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right, I've only ever seen it written down. They lived in a remote farmhouse on the Isle of Man. The house had no electricity, no running water or phone line, and their nearest neighbour was over a mile away. One night, the family heard a faint scratching, scuffling sound coming from within the walls of the house. It was accompanied by strange growling and spitting noises, described by the Irvings as changing between the sound of a dog, a ferret, and a human baby. Assuming they had a rat in the house, Jim Irving set down some traps and poison to try and kill it, but to no avail. In desperation, he tried growling loudly through a crack in the wall to try and scare it away, but to his surprise, instead of scampering, the creature simply repeated the growl back to him. Amazed by this feat of imitation, they decided to see what other sounds it could copy. They began making various bird calls and animal noises, and they found it would imitate them perfectly. Within days, all they had to do was shout out the name of an animal, and the creature in the walls would imitate these sounds with great accuracy. Voirrey then tried to teach it nursery rhymes, and to their amazement, it was able to produce human speech and repeat the rhymes back to her. By 1932, the creature had become a fluent English speaker. It was able to tell them that it was an Indian mongoose born in Delhi on the 7th of August 1852, and its name was Jeff. Word of this amazing talking mongoose spread across the Isle, and eventually it reached mainland Britain. The story was taken up by famous ghost hunter Harry Price, and he sent a colleague to the house to investigate the case. The investigator spent 5 hours with the family, but he saw and heard no evidence of this mysterious creature. But then as he was walking away from the house, there was a shrill scream from inside. It shouted, "Go away! Who is that man?" followed by a number of unintelligible squeals. He rushed back inside the house, but the voice stopped as soon as he entered. He returned the next day to conduct further investigations. This time he heard the voice, but only when Margaret and Voirrey were upstairs, leaving him downstairs alone. He suspected some kind of trickery and he attempted to sneak up the stairs to see if it was one of the Irvings making the voice. But he tripped up on the stair and made a loud clattering noise, and it caused Jeff to shout out and alert his presence. He attempted repeatedly to communicate with the voice, asking Jeff to show itself, but it would always refuse. Jeff seemed very wary of strangers. It would shout out insults, sometimes threatening them with violence. This would be the pattern for most other investigators. The strange talking animal would attract many paranormal researchers and tabloid journalists, but they always left with inconclusive evidence. As with many poltergeist-type hauntings, the activity seemed centered around a teenage member of the family. Many suspected Voirrey of faking the voice when people weren't looking. The interior of the Irvings' house was clad with wooden boards, and there was a small gap between the wood and the stone exterior of the house. It was thought that Voirrey would speak through a gap in the wooden boards, and the acoustics would carry her voice to other parts of the house, creating an effect as if a voice was coming from within the walls itself. One reporter for the Manchester Daily Dispatch wrote, "Yesterday I heard several spoken sentences. The conversation was between the weasel voice and Mrs. Irving, who was unseen to me in another room, while the girl sat motionless in a chair at the table. I could see her reflection, although not very clearly, in a mirror on the other side of the room. She had her fingers to her lips. The lips did not move as far as I could see, but they were partly hidden by her fingers. When I edged my way into the room, the voice ceased. The little girl continued to sit motionless without taking any notice of us. She was sucking a piece of string, I now saw." Along with her disembodied voice, Jeff was also capable of other poltergeist-like phenomena. Coins would be mysteriously thrown at visitors' heads, and furniture would be moved around by an unseen force. Jeff would demand certain foodstuffs, such as bacon and bananas, as well as a saucer of milk. These would be placed high up on a ceiling rafter, and they would vanish when nobody was looking. The case of the talking mongoose bears many similarities to another poltergeist case that happened in the 1970s called the Enfield haunting. I covered this in more detail in another video, but I'll briefly go over it again here. In the Enfield haunting, a family were plagued by classic poltergeist activity. Objects were thrown around the house by an unseen force, furniture would move, doors would slam. The activity focused on one of the teenage girls in the house, who would periodically be possessed by the entity and produced a deep guttural voice.
Well, perhaps you've got something to say to them.
Yeah. I'd like to know how you make this noise without bashing Janet's vocal cords to pieces. If I do it for half a minute, I get a sore throat. Goose chases here.
I'm using the Enfield case because it was very well documented and gives a good example of the sort of contradictions involved in solving a poltergeist case. The most obvious explanation would be that the girl was simply faking the voice and throwing things around when nobody was looking. In fact, a hidden tape recorder captured the girl colluding with her sister to fake some of the evidence for the paranormal investigator. The voice would often give false and childish information, and a lot of the poltergeist activity would only happen when the girls were left alone in the room. On the other hand, sometimes the voice would give facts about deceased people that the girls would have no knowledge of, and there were eyewitness accounts, including from police officers, that say they witnessed furniture moving and thrown objects with no possible interference from any of the family members.
It came off the floor, or nearly a ½ inch I should say, and I saw it slide off to the right, about 3.5 to 4 feet before it came to rest. I checked to see whether or not it could possibly have slid along the floor. I placed a marble on the floor to see whether or not the marble would go in the same direction as the chair did, and it didn't roll at all. I checked for wires under the cushion of the chair, and I could find no explanation at all.
And that's the thing with poltergeists. They're known as trickster spirits. They will impersonate people, give false information, and generally sow an atmosphere of confusion around their existence. Perhaps it benefits a poltergeist to terrorise a family, but then lead investigators to believe a hoax has been perpetrated. Jeff the Talking Mongoose bears all the markings of a classic poltergeist case, but it also bears the hallmarks of a bored teenager looking to escape the drudgery of life in an isolated farmhouse. So, is there any evidence that Jeff was anything apart from an elaborate hoax? Well, some investigators visited the house in the hope of debunking the case and went away convinced it was real. There are reports of stones being thrown at the outside of the house, despite everyone being inside at the time. Jeff would also describe things that were in visitors' bags or envelopes, which the Irvings would have no knowledge about. Apparently you could read newspaper headlines in the dark, and would be able to hear people whispering quietly from the other side of the house. There's also the question of why they would invent this hoax and keep it going for so long. Some reporters may have offered financial rewards for a scoop on the story, but they maintained the story long after tabloid interest had died down, and they kept it up for so long that they fell into disrepute with the local people. They were unable to sell their house for a profit because people believed it was haunted. In any case, of all the wild stories to invent, why would they think up a talking mongoose? There's an article about Jeff written 30 years after the events, and it contains an interview with Voirrey. I'll link it in the description so you can have a read, but you can see even 30 years later, she was still adamant that Jeff was completely real. She died in 2005, but all through her life she still kept up with the story, so if it was fiction, she was extremely dedicated to it. So if Jeff did exist, what could he have been? A ghost or demonic entity seems the most likely explanation. In fact, Jeff often described himself as a ghost in the form of a mongoose, or a creature from the 5th dimension. But the family always maintained that he was a real physical animal, one that would eat food and urinate through cracks in the wall. Earlier in life, Jim Irving had bought a cage of mongooses to the island and released them on the farmstead to try and control the rabbit population, so we know there were mongooses there at one point in time. There's also been a recent study that claims that mongooses are capable of producing complex vowel strings, something only humans were thought capable of. So maybe a mongoose could be taught to imitate human speech, but the idea of one being capable of intelligent conversation seems a little far-fetched to me. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, there weren't any recordings of Jeff's voice, or if they were made, I've never heard any. But there were a few other specimens of evidence gathered. One was a number of paw and teeth marks that Jeff agreed to make in clay when nobody was looking. These were analysed by experts who concluded that they were not of any known animal. They were probably fakes, and the prints were all different sizes, so either the family had faked them or Jeff had completely different sized paws. And looking at them, they do look pretty fake. They look like someone's just stuck their fingers in clay to make a paw print. Jeff also provided the family with a sample of its fur, which again was analysed by experts. The analysis suggested that the hair had most probably come from a dog. They later analysed a sample of fur taken from the Irving's dog and concluded that both samples had come from the same animal. This could be the nail in the coffin for Jeff's existence. It seems to point to a hoax, but then again it could be more evidence of a mischievous spirit playing tricks. Who knows, maybe Jeff just made some fake paw prints and took a fur sample from the dog to try and confuse people even more. I'll leave that up to you to decide. There are also some photographs of Jeff. One investigator wanted to get a picture of the talking mongoose, but the creature refused to show itself, saying it would only appear to Voirrey. An agreement was made, and they left Voirrey with a camera. Once the investigators had left, Jeff would show himself and Voirrey would take the pictures of him. Once again, this evidence is highly suspect. The pictures are blurry and hard to make out. Many have claimed that this is just a picture of a fur collar placed on a fence post. There is one photo that puzzled me. I've seen it in various books listed as James Irving pointing to Jeff's hands emerging from behind a beam. It doesn't seem to be part of the photo set that Voirrey took. It looks a bit more professional. So what puzzled me is, if there was a third party present here when they took the photo, wouldn't there be some sort of reports that they witnessed a strange pair of hands coming out of the wall? Surely seeing something like this would be conclusive proof that there really was something living in the walls of the house. I found a guy online called Christopher Joseph. Again, I'm not sure of the pronunciation of that name, so forgive me if it's wrong. Anyway, he's written a book called Jeff, The Strange Tale of an Extra Special Talking Mongoose. And according to his website, he spent 7 years researching the case. If anyone would know the story behind this photo, it would be him. So I dropped him an email to ask about it, and this is the response I got. I believe this photo was staged, in the sense that it was intended to recreate an incident, to show what the Irvings had seen of Jeff on the rare occasions when he was visible to them. It also shows the outlandishly large-sized hands that Jeff was said to have. These white hands, which look like cotton wool or something similar to me, were placed there, I think by Voirrey. The caption on the back of the photo is, "How Jeff Showed His Fingers," and it was written by Nandor Fodor, who took the staged photo when he was staying at Dawlish Cashen in 1937. He wrote elsewhere that the fingers came through the slit in Voirrey's room, and that the fingers are yellow and very hard and cold to the touch. This must have been something that one or more of the family had told him, because during the week he stayed there, Jeff made no appearance whatsoever, much to Fodor's disappointment. The room in the photo is almost certainly Jim and Margaret's bedroom. Their daughter Voirrey's bedroom was on the other side of the partition. Looking again at the photo, I now wonder whether the fingers are Voirrey's, although they do look rather big and fat. One of the most outlandish details of Jeff's described appearance was the outsized hands compared to the rest of his body, which was, the Irving said, around 6 inches, plus a 6-inch tail. Jim Irving wrote in one of his many letters, "The hand came through for a sufficiently long time for all of us to see. So far as I can tell, I saw 3 fingers on each hand, light yellow. They had nails on them." So that clears that up a bit, and it gives us a little idea of the atmosphere in the Irving's home at the time. The paranormal researcher frustrated when Jeff refused to appear, the family eager to prove his existence, but both parties having to resort to mere recreations of the events. The description of Jeff's fingers being cold and hard to the touch is an interesting detail. Possibly it could be more evidence that Voirrey was playing a trick. The description sounds something like mannequin hands, and definitely nothing like a mongoose's furry paws. Anyway, thanks to Christopher Joseph for the extra information. I'll put a link to his website in the description for helping me out. His book looks like it's got loads more details in it than I was able to research online, so it'll be an interesting read. Eventually for the family, their tabloid interest died down, and Jeff's visits to the family became less and less frequent over time. In 1945, the house was sold to a man called Leslie Graham. In 1946, Leslie announced to the press that he had shot and killed a strange creature on his property. The creature was described as being neither a stoat, ferret or mongoose. It had black and white fur and its skin was extremely thick, suggesting it was incredibly old. There was apparently a photo of this creature in the papers, but I can't find it online, so we'll have to use our imagination. Voirrey later said that this couldn't have been Jeff, as the fur was the wrong colour and the body was far too large. What this creature was is still not known. To me, from the description, it sounds like a badger, but surely someone would have identified it as that at the time. I guess it just remains another one of those unexplained mysteries that seem to attach themselves to this case. Whether or not Jeff was real or a hoax, I'll leave you to make your own mind up. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. There's loads more information to look into if this case interests you. It's so complicated and there's so many weird details that if I tried to cover everything in this video, it would be hours long. But hopefully I've done enough to interest you and covered most of the most important details of the case. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to support the channel, check out the subscribe star page and become a patron. And remember to subscribe or else I'm going to send a talking weasel to live in the walls of your house and eat bananas. Until next time, goodbye.